Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Allen. I think we survived the first week. Um, this is our first lecture for really Social Studies 422. I was kind of thinking about the best ways to do this. I am just going to just bust through like I would in class if we were meeting live. That means there's obviously, like I said at the intro, there's going to be some ums and ahs. There's probably going to be some pauses. There's going to be me looking for stuff on my computer. But instead of just stopping and retaking, I think I'm just going to go with the flow. Before I do that, a few things. One, as you can probably see, I'm recording this from my house. I have a middle schooler and his best friend is over today. They are usually pretty quiet and they are all the way down in our basement. But if you see me look to the side, it's probably because they're running up the stairs and I'm kind of scared. It sounds like Godzilla is going to like come in and attack my room. So if that distraction happens, forgive me, but I'm not going to stop recording. It's the reality of quarantine, right? I would never say that unless in this current global situation. Second thing, I know I've said this a million times via email and on the intro, and this is probably going to be the last time I really say it, but I guess I worry a little bit. This class has traditionally been live. We decided to do it online this time. One, for something different. It made me kind of look at everything from a different point of view. Also, because we're doing it online, I guess I worry a little bit about making sure everyone's comfortable and knowing what they're doing and such. Everything's going to be posted online. I'm cool with it. I just want to make sure everyone knows. Instead of like saying I have a room reserved or anything like that, I'm just going to set up a Zoom room from 11 through 12 on Mondays. And actually, I may even set it up to 12:30. But if you're going to come in, just fire me an email, or you're welcome to just pop in if you have any questions. Of course, during my regular office hours, you can do that also, or just email me. But I just want you to know, one, I want to make sure that you know that I'm available, and two, flexible on a lot of things. This course, this semester, a lot of things are just not normal. It's no one's fault. It's the way it is. But we'll just kind of deal with it. But just to let you know, if you need me, I am available. Just come into the Zoom room on Monday during normal office hours, stop by, or just email me and we'll set something up. With all that being said, why don't we actually do some social studies instead of all this preliminary introduction stuff and all. Very first thing, I noticed that everyone has posted up on what the heck is social studies. That is something we would have done live. A lot of different viewpoints, very funny, kind of gives me an idea of where everyone's coming from as far as what they think social studies is, what's their influences, and things like that. Um, I'll have those discussion board grades up. That's our first tough topic, which defining it as we're going to say today, it is a little bit of a tough topic talking about what social studies actually is, but we're going to look at a little more difficult topics as far as in the classroom with the discussion board. Before we even get going, I want to share my screen so you don't have to look at my unshaven face anymore, or at least in a limited capacity. But as you can see, under week 2, we got a few things we're going to do this week. One, we're going to do a brief history of what social studies is or what social studies are. We're going to look at the National Council for the Social Studies themes. I also want to give you a little background on that organization. It's very, very important, I think, for you all. Also, we're going to look at state standards. We're not going to go through each one, but I just want you to be aware of where they are. It's very important for your lesson plannings and as you start to go out in the field. The related readings for this lecture is actually going to be the Zeman chapters 1 and 2. This week, you got 2 things you need to do. You need to do a blog on the resources. I'll show you that here in a second. The Flipgrid, number 1, that's just a discussion on the social studies standards. And of course, there's the resources. They are all here. So just to kind of give you a quick understanding what you need to do, when you're doing the resources blog, you're just going to click right there. It's going to take you to that subpage. There's another short lecture that's there. As you can see, that's me in my office. It's 2 things that I just wanted you to see. I have the links up below if you really want to check them out. It's PowerPoint Palooza and it's the living room candidate. I'll let the video kind of talk about what both are in a little greater detail, but just to kind of give you a quick summary, there are 2 websites. One, the living room candidate, is something on elections. It has every presidential ad back through Eisenhower, official ads. You can use them. They also have lesson plans, electoral college maps, and such. And PowerPoint Palooza is one that is a site that has a ton of really well-made PowerPoints for world civics and US history. The lady who does it actually teaches a lot of AP history. You can see her name there actually on the slide. After you watch that video, the video is actually pretty short. I think I try to keep them around 5 minutes. After you kind of watch that, you just go to blog 1, click on that. You just simply tell me, do you think you could see yourself using either one of these resources in any capacity in the classroom? That's your first part. It's your first assignment, or you could do the other one first. I don't particularly care. The other one is going to be the Flipgrid. Flipgrid, I'm going to click on that. You're going to click on the standards. That's going to take you to the Flipgrid discussion. I don't know if everyone has done Flipgrid before, but you have to record a response to a question. There's the directions, but you're going to go ahead and click there, and you're going to see a bunch of images. I put the link on there. I use something called WakeLink. You do not need to read the articles. I just want you to look at the images for each one of those and tell me where you would place that image in the National Council of Social Studies themes. And we're going to talk about those today here in a few minutes. You don't, like I say, it's something we would have done in class where you would have gotten laminated images and you would have put them up, but I thought this was a way to kind of do it, and it gets you familiar with what those themes are. The organization is really important as far as what state standards, because it's kind of the national, it sets the tone, so to speak. So this one, if you have any problems with it, let me know. I'm also going to send you a code. I set up a class in Flipgrid that if you just want to register, so when things are posted, you can check them out. I did not put that up yet. This link should, I'm going to click it and find out, should take you right to the WakeLink, or there you go, I'm sorry, WakeLink, right to the Flipgrid. And you'll just record your response right there. There's the question. Look at the images attached. You do not need to read the articles. Respond to the Flipgrid. If you want to see the images, you can click that Wakelet right there. And what it'll do is it'll take you to hopefully a folder. There they are, NCSS standards, and they'll all load up there. And you can look at each one individually. Ah, there you go. Those are the images. Some of them you might not even have to click on. You can tell, like, that's Henry VIII. Which theme will you think Henry VIII would go under? Nixon and Elvis. There's no set. If you think one goes in, you don't have to try to use all 10 in this. It's just which one you think fits. I just picked some up that images I've used in the past. This one you might have to actually click on because Google's kind of being funny. But anyway, that's it. That's the assignment for this week. Please make sure you're on that, and we'll go back and look at the syllabus at the end to make sure we're all on the same page. But hopefully everyone, and this will be up, but that is week 2, and I'll have that right up there for you. Now this week, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. We're actually going to talk a little bit about something like you were posting on the discussion board as far as what the heck is social studies, and you know what animal it is, what car it is, and such. Again, if you haven't looked at everyone's discussion boards or viewpoints, feel free to go on there and respond which ones you like, which ones you don't, which influence. They were very well done. I'm recording this on Thursday. I haven't actually read everyone's, so I'm not going to sit here and kid you, but I will definitely have a response up to everyone by Monday. And what we're going to do today is just kind of give you a little background on the field itself. So why don't we just go ahead and dive in. Go ahead and hit play. Whoops. There we go. All right. Going to kind of just keep it a boring looking PowerPoint, but social studies, it's a difficult field to define. And the reasons that social studies is so difficult is if you really think about it, think about all the courses you have to take content-wise for social studies. A lot of people just automatically go social studies is history. And that's kind of the big debate within the field. I have to admit, I default to history. I was an undergrad in history. I went to WVU, got my master's and then my doctorate in social studies education, but I'm rooted in history. But if you think about it, especially you can look at different schools or backgrounds if you've kind of come in. Psychology gets in here. Political science is a big one. Geography, all those fields. Economics, which some people love, some people don't. You know, you got a little bit of that math bugaboo. But they all fall within the social studies. Think about your high school experiences. The electives, a lot of times there's econ electives. A lot of times there's Civil War electives. A lot of times there's sociology, psychology, AP Psych. They all fall into this. So what exactly is it, and how did we get to this point? How do we get from history to social studies? And again, I just kind of mentioned all that, but is it expanded history? Is it an equal, incorporation of various fields? Should we look at political science, sociology, anthropology, economics, and psych um, at the same details as we do history? I have a feeling if all of you were in class and if we actually got into it, I think history seems to be kind of the anchor for everything, and everything kind of shoots off from there. If you look at the standards, it seems to be that way also. But there's some people that don't believe that that should be the case. I think most social studies people seem to fall into one of two camps. You're either kind of in that humanities camp or that social science camp. And with humanities, I'm kind of thinking along the lines of history, geography, and such, or maybe in that social science, you're more of a sociology, econ type person. I think political science, though, I guess technically would be more social science. I think it kind of splits a little bit in a way. But again, social studies is kind of difficult. And by the way, there's no perfect answer to this. Uh, it's still debated to this day. A lot of people try to define it. The National Council of Social Studies, which I'll show you at the very end, they have a definition for it, and they're more inclined to feel that it should be more all of everything combined. I don't know if the standards always lead themselves to that kind of philosophy. Um, at the end of the day, what's the ultimate goal of social studies? I think it's actually changed a little bit, and that's one thing that we're going to talk about with unit plans in a few weeks, because I'm changing the way that I'm doing unit plans this semester. Lucky for you, because I think the goal now seems to be more inquiry-based type thinking. It's probably always been somewhat that, but originally, when we're going way back, we're talking like early 1900s. I think the goal, and probably ran clear up to the 80s, was to promote global understanding, citizenship. Are these the things we want to know? I'm going to say it in a slide or two, but I think at the root of it, it was to promote citizenship and an understanding of U.S. history and patriotism and things like that. Think about your high school U.S. history textbooks. What are they? They're always very patriotic, usually on the cover. They might have a flag. They might have George Washington, even Neil Armstrong, holding the flag. That U.S. citizenship. I'm probably jumping the gun here a little bit, but I am going to jump the gun, so I'm not going to do it. It's on another slide. But today it might even fall into a little bit more of the global understanding. Globalization has made the world a smaller place. In some ways, I hate to bring it up and be a Debbie Downer, so to speak, but even COVID, in some ways, our world is so intertwined with travel and such. Some of the spreading we've limited because of globalization. The world is shrinking because of technology. Is the goal of social studies to be a little more having an understanding of how the world operates. So, with all that being said, again, we can't come up with a clear definition of social studies, but you can kind of think about it. Is it more social science? Is it more history? Is it more humanities? We all have different ideas. Like I say, I'm rooted in history, but that's not to say that that's necessarily right. And of course, what's the ultimate goal of the field? Is it today to promote global understanding? Is it to stress citizenship? That we'll talk about it, but that was the original goal of it. Is that still an important goal of social studies? As you can see, it's a fairly new field. It's really a product of 19th century and early 20th century public school expansion. If you've had, everyone in this class has had it. If you've had 200, you kind of know that progressive era, especially in the early 20th century, really reformed how public schools operated. That's where the debate about what should be in history was starting to take place. There's a gentleman on here it's on another slide by the name of Harold Rugg. He's a lot of times seen as the godfather of social studies, because he fought for this inclusion of many fields into the history content because it was kind of already there. It lent itself to it. As you can see, in the 19th century, early 20th century curriculum, it was kind of history and allied subjects. Again, that root in history. And the initial goal of social studies, as I said earlier, and I'm not going to try to repeat myself too much, it was about preserving that democratic way of life, creating strong citizens, socializing immigrants into the American way of life. If you think about it, and all of you I know have had a lot of history classes, what was going on in the late 19th century? There was another immigration explosion. A lot of people from Italy, Germany, were coming in here. Poland. If you just look at West Virginia, I don't know where everyone's from, but look out towards Clarksburg and all, and then the coal mines. A lot of these were Irish and Italian immigrants, strong, Catholic-based areas even today. Um, when those students or those children of those immigrants went to school, what was one of the goals? One of the goals early on was to kind of create strong citizenships. I hate to use the word indoctrinate to the United States or American way of life, but I guess that would be the word we would use. And that was the goal of social studies. It was kind of like, let's create strong citizens. Now, there's a decade, and again, I have it on the PowerPoint, but I can't help myself to just go ahead and say it. There's a decade that comes along that kind of changes everything. And if you were here, I have a feeling one of you would probably nail it just like that. But it's the 1960s. The 1960s, when there's a lot of social change, it's that post-World War II era. There's new ways of thinking. That's when fields like sociology and psych start to kind of come in a little more with social studies. Originally, social studies was still mostly political science, history, geography type things. The 60s changed things. Sociology becomes, I don't want to call sociology a recent field, but it definitely gets more ingrained, I think, in the way we do things in the 60s and how the direction of social studies went. It gets a little more social science-y. I kind of already said this, but modern social studies has many fields and advocates. There's a lot of groups, and I'm sure if you're just watching television and the news today, that feel like they have a lot of sway on the way that the curriculum should be taught. A lot of social scientists, historians, citizenship advocates, social justice type advocate groups, personal development, school districts, locations, all these people. Social studies is a weird subject. It's one of those ones where you'll hear people say, I hate history, I hate politics, but everyone thinks they know everything about it, if that makes sense. That's some of the things you're going to deal with as a social studies teacher and the influence of these groups. There's one, actually it's going to be on our discussion board in a few weeks, but there was one event that happened over the summer. The project is kind of over a year old now, but it really picked up some steam because it won a Pulitzer, and it's kind of controversial because some historians think that there's some questionable information in there, and some people think it's the direction that social studies needs to go. But if you've been watching the news, the 1619 Project, that's a group that was founded. The New York Times had a lot of sway in that, and a lot of schools are starting to pick up a lot of the curriculum from that. Again, that falls into that advocacy groups, if I can spit that out. And even, the New York Times, it's, a publication. It has some influence on maybe the way we're learning things. That's also a skill we're going to talk about, where can students filter the information that they're getting and researching. That goes back into that document-based, inquiry-based skills. The author of your textbook, I'm sorry I didn't bring mine upstairs when I'm recording this, but the Zeven book, the main social studies methods book, he believes that history provides the basis for better social studies education. And I think most people do that. It just seems like most things, if you had your little word web, I'm doing it with my hands here, everything would kind of sprout off from history. It just does. But again, there are people who would debate that point, but I'm not one of them. This is all important stuff, what you're going to teach in the classroom, and you're going to put your spin on a lot of things. But the reality of things, what you're actually going to teach is what you're hired to do. So I'm assuming most of the people in here are from West Virginia, but if you're from Maryland, no big deal. I have the standards for those up too. But if you're in West Virginia, if you are hired to teach 6th grade, you're going to do a form of U.S. history. If you are in 7th grade, you're going to do some form of world history, kind of the ancient period. That's usually the student's first form. If you're teaching 8th grade social studies, you're going to do West Virginia history and Appalachia background type stuff. So again, that's the reality. You're going to teach that. Now, can you put your own spin on those standards and how you're going to deliver it and what you can get into? Most definitely, thumbs up. But that's, that's still, everything's going to be rooted back. I'm pointing at the PowerPoint in those standards. And I would like to take a moment to look at those before we finish up. Again, some of the things you might want to try to do when you're teaching your social studies class, and I think these are modern goals, strengthen student understanding of the world, engage in debates, discussion. We're going to talk about, as this class moves on, ways to do debates and discussions. I love discussions in my social studies class. It's the best part, and I have a feeling that's probably why a lot of you all are in this class, because you had good discussions. Of course, one thing that especially newer teachers worry about, I still worried about it after I'd been teaching for 20 years, classroom management. Don't let that word scare you or anything like that, but there's ways to set up debates that it's under control and it's done in a professional manner. It's just trial and error. There may be things that you do with discussions that you like and you'll keep the whole way that you teach. There may be something that doesn't work, you just change it up. But that's something that hopefully you're going to try to do in your social studies class, some form of discussion. And you want students to have form their own opinions and feelings and attitudes towards certain things. I am going to spend a few minutes and talk about this group. This is the National Council of Social Studies. I would strongly, you actually get a discount being students, suggest joining this organization. One thing I was hoping to propose this fall, of course, when COVID hit, it's not going to happen. The National Council of Social Studies does national conferences every year, huge, massive. They bring in people like Ken Burns. If you watch PBS, Rick Steves, he's a travel guy. He spoke. Tons of news people, a lot of people that are on all MSNBC, Fox, CNN. I've seen them all. They were going to be in DC this year. They've been in Chicago and actually Boston and St. Louis. They've been in those places recently, but this year was DC. They're kind of rooted in DC, and this was the 100th anniversary. I wanted to actually see if we could go down, but of course now it's not going to happen until next year. They are doing a virtual conference, but for the cost for a virtual one, I don't know. I'll share the information with you. But just to give you a background on this, this was the organization that really sets the tone for standards and what we're going to try to teach in a social studies classroom. They were organized or created in 1921. They were actually a spinoff of the American Historical Association. So you may have heard that in some of your history classes here at Shepherd. It establishes social studies national standards, or they refer to them as deans. They have a lot of committees on different social studies issues. They do issue position statements on a lot of social things. And it's actually formed by a collection of professors in the 20s from Columbia. I'll just kind of tell you, in the world of education, Columbia is usually seen as I guess, the major education school in the country, in Columbia and New York City. I don't know if today it has the #1 educational department, but it's definitely a lot of the history of the field of education is rooted in those professors at Columbia, especially in the 1910s, 1920s. But National Council of Social Studies, just to give you the early days, like I said, it was an organization focused on providing materials and ideas in the field of social studies. They still do that. They actually have a lot of magazines. There's one called Social Education. I'm looking on my floor. I have a few, and I'll show it to you here in a minute. I'm going to slide off screen. They issue a lot of things. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to look backwards, but it's called Social Education. And actually what it does, if you ever want to see these, they put out lesson plans and articles on different things for social studies. You get these once a month. They're fantastic. You get a lot of lesson plans that I would suggest, even if you don't do them word by word or frame by frame, you can kind of adapt them to your classroom. Sorry, small hiccup there. And then, there's something on the citizenship test, but this is an awesome magazine. They also put out a lot of books. This one may not be one that you want to read, but collaboration to improve social studies education at the university level, but they have tons on different topics, and you can check out their website. When the National Council for the Social Studies was actually founded, there was that same debate about whether it should provide just materials and ideas for subject area, or should it become like push for social studies to be its own field or its own content. I will go ahead and tell you that today I think it's pretty clear that they view themselves and social studies as its own field, separate from history. A lot of their content is stressed on history, but I think if you ask them if they were a social studies person or a history person, they would say they're a social studies person, where I think a lot of teachers think of themselves as history first, and social studies is just kind of what we go by. Just looking at the discussion board for your intros, a lot of you said, I want to teach secondary history. So anyway, I want to go here. I'm just going to show this to you. And sorry, my screen gets a little, I'm on a Mac that gets a little funny sometimes, a little temperamental. I love it. I'm a Mac person, but this laptop let me fight sometimes. And NCSS, if you type that in, I will post this link on there. So you can see there's the virtual conference. I'll jump there first, why not? Just to show you. So you can see there's this year the speakers. Chelsea Clinton, Ken Burns, Nicole Jones. She's actually the one that was in the 1619 project. She's been in the news a lot recently. Samantha Power. I'm not for sure. Let me see what she is. Is it going to take me to what's her bio? It's thinking about it. It's thinking about it, but it's not going to do it, is it? Actually taught a student by the name of Samantha Power. I believe she's recently graduated. There we go. And as you can see, there she goes. She's a professor. She's written a lot of books. There you go. So it gives you a bio on there. Chuck Todd, as you can see. And I will say this is usually, even though it would look like this, and you might think, well, this is a virtual conference. This is usually kind of standard for the type of people that they have at every conference. It would have just been in DC this year. They're actually doing 2 conferences next year, one in Minnesota and one in DC to make up for the lost one this year. If you're still at Shepherd and you're interested in presenting, come see me or contact me because I'm doing a presentation there. It was already accepted on the Bayou Tapestry and kind of using it in the classroom. The poster presentations are really good, especially if you want to kind of get some stuff on your resume. So that's something we can talk about later. They also have their own honor society for high schools and middle schools now. I don't think there's a whole lot of these around. But you can start chapters. If I was still teaching, I think I would probably be doing it just to kind of get, students involved in social studies type topics. I can go to the home page here. And as you can see, they have a lot of things and lessons and publications and such. But I'll send you this link, but I would definitely think about joining. Like I say, for a student, it's a little cheaper. And if you get hired in a county, they may actually help you out a little bit. So, all right, let me go back. Oops, did I lose my keystone? There we go. All righty, let me get back going to this. Old Harold Rugg. I mentioned him already, so I'm not going to get too bogged down. But Harold Rugg, whoops. Harold Rugg. Harold Rugg, like I say, he was at Columbia. And he's usually seen as one of the founders of social studies. He's the guy who just pushed for this subgroup out of the historical things. He felt that it just wasn't organized in the ways that it was doing. I'm just going to read the quote. Felt that individual social science humanity fields limited students' ability to organize information. What he's saying is we have all of these subfields and subjects that are kind of related and they get into things. Why don't we kind of merge them into one and make them more organized and cohesive? So that's Harold Rugg. There's not going to be a whole lot on this class with him. I just figure we owe him his due because he's definitely one of the early pioneers of social studies education. Now, this is what you have to do with your Flipgrid. I'm going to just go through these. I'm going to show you something that's on the website too. There's a free book that was on there. That's just the background on the 10 themes of social studies. I have it on Sakai in a couple places. Today, what the National Council of Social Studies has done, they've created these themes that they feel like social studies kind of is rooted in. I'm going to go through them. I think when you look at them, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly what fields it's connected with. And it's from these fields, they give an overriding or statement of what you should be teaching related to these fields. And that's where our standards or our state standards kind of go into the directions and such. They were created in '94. They've been tweaked here and there, but by and large, this is what they are. Just to kind of give you a little quick background, I've mentioned all this, the 60s. That's where I think you start to see more, social science type things integrated. I do want to say one thing before I do. There's been attempts to reform, why does it keep doing that to me? There has been attempts to reform social studies a few times and history standards specifically. In 1994, there was a big battle about creating national history standards. But guess what? Not every state agreed with the ones that were put in there with the standards, and that those were the ones they wanted to teach. So they kind of fell on their face. They redid them, but I don't think states adapted them like they wanted them to. That was actually sponsored by UCLA, I believe. 60s, I mentioned. Um, the 2000s, there's a lot of the same battles that go on in the social studies classroom. There is a big movement, justifiably, for multicultural education, especially as our populations become more diverse. So this is something we'll get into with some of our, I hate to even call them controversial topics, just how you're going to approach things. How much African American history are you going to have in your standards? Do we even have them? I'm sorry, in your lessons? Do we have them in our standards like we should? Hispanic cultures, female history, women's rights. That was something early on that one of my students asked me quickly. She goes, "Hey, are we going to talk about some of the women's issues and such in this class?" It was something I thought I was lacking in. So that was probably early 2000s, late 90s, and I kind of redid how I did early 20th century history. I mean, yesterday, I'm recording this on Thursday, was, I believe, the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. I probably would have done something in my class on that. So definitely things you need to be aware of. Don't try to overwhelm yourself when you first hit the schools, but, start to add things in your toolbox. I'm putting things in my tool belt there. All right, this is what I was talking about. The 10 themes of social studies. National Council for the Social Studies has established 10 themes that we need to be familiar with. The first one is culture. I am not going to read that whole thing word for word. This PowerPoint is posted if you need it. And also it kind of gets into this, you can read it right now. But basically it's the study, just to kind of look at the questions. What's the common characteristics of different cultures? What's their ideas, their beliefs, political ideals. How do they accommodate different cultures and beliefs? Belief systems within their own areas. What language does it tell us about the culture? This kind of incorporates your geography, your sociology, your history, your anthropology. You'll see these rooted in there. But the first theme is culture. And those are kind of the questions that it looks at. And this is something where if you saw an image of, on the flip grid of someone, maybe, how about going to church in Italy? It might fall under religious beliefs. Now there's another one that you can maybe put it under too, but maybe religion you feel like falls more under culture, and that's fine. So culture. The second one is time, continuality, and change. I think this one is pretty straightforward. This one falls mostly into history. Who am I? What happened in the past? How am I connected to the past? What might happen in the future? That's, pretty straightforward, but that's the second theme. People, places, and environments. I'm pretty sure I had a textbook called this, but I think I'm looking at it now. It's called People, Places, and Change. I think this one is obvious that it deals with more geography or geographical type topics. Where are things located? Why are they located there? What do we mean by region? I don't know. This is an old term. I used to teach it way back when, but the 5 themes of geography, how does that work? How do landforms change? Yeah, stuff like that. So that's the third theme. Fourth themes, sorry, my nose is itching a little bit. Individual development and identity. A person's identity is shaped by one's culture, groups, and institutional influences. How do people learn? What do people behave? Why do people behave as they do? What influences them? What are the basic needs in a variety of contexts? Just kind of throwing those out there, but this falls into your anthropology and psych type fields. I would say one thing, it also maybe be a little bit of sociology. So individual development and identity. Individuals, groups, and institutions. I had mentioned earlier where maybe if you were showing Italy and people going to church, which is usually Catholicism, maybe churches fall under this instead if you were doing your flip grid. Individuals, groups, and institutions. The Catholic Church is a pretty big institution. But, what is the role of institutions in societies? How are people influenced by institutions? How do institutions change? Which, when I say your role or my role, we're talking about the students in institutional change. I think this one gets into a lot: sociology, history, anthropology, psych, political science. Power, authority, and government or governance. That's definitely, I think, you could throw in a little history, but I think political science and anything dealing with government would fall into that. What is power? What forms does it take? Who holds it? Who gains it? What's authority? What are important documents? Constitution, Magna Carta, things like that. That's another theme right there. Oops, sorry, that's a little arrow. Whoops. There you go. Sorry. Production, distribution, and consumption. I think that was pretty self-explanatory, but that is econ. What's produced? What is the production to an organization? I'm sorry. How is production to be organized? If I can spit that out. How are goods and services distributed? That's all, econ type topics. That's another theme. Power, distribution, and consumption. Science, technology, and society. What is new technology? This is an important one. I think sometimes gets poo-pooed, even when I'm talking in the class, when we're live or virtual. But if you think about it, this one really falls into globalization and change, and how things since 1900 have moved at a lot quicker rate than pre-1900. But anyway, what technology is being used? How do we deal with change? How do we preserve fundamental values and beliefs? That's something that you might see on one of the images, where you might have a tribe that's in Brazil in the rainforest. How do we preserve their way of life? Is it important that we preserve their way of life? Things like that. That would fall into science, technology, and society. Global connections. Again, this was probably more of a geography and a cultural, maybe even econ type thing. But, how do we interact on a global scale? Human rights, the environment, when we do things. Fishing rights, that's something I was thinking. I was just reading an article about this about Iceland, and how they've never joined the EU, and a lot of it has to do with because they would regulate the fishing industry. Does that make sense? It's an econ type topic. Is it an environmental thing because they don't have to be limited in how many fish that they catch? Can they wipe things out? Is that a good thing, bad thing? But it's their way of life, and they wouldn't be able to survive. Get into stuff like that. It's obviously why you're a social studies major or focus. But again, global connections, that's another one of our themes. Civic ideals and practices is another theme. About civic participation. How do you get involved? If anyone's in the field, I'm assuming a lot of you are going to be in for 370, especially in the field. If you're out in November, obviously this one's going to come up because the election is a big one. I always tell the story to all my classes when I teach this class. In 2016, things were kind of off the rails, and I'm not taking one side or the other in this, so I don't know what everyone's political beliefs are, but I just remember in the build up to the election, there was a student who was critiquing the current president, Donald Trump, and this student got very upset, and I had to take him out in the hall. He was crying. I said, your opinions are your own opinions. Didn't think much of it. He seemed to bounce back. He's a senior in high school, I think, now. But after the election, the student who was actually getting on the other student, he came in and he was upset and he was crying. The point, what I'm saying is this is something that sometimes it's one of the trickier things for students to talk, or I'm sorry, for teachers to talk about, because you're going to have to ask yourself, am I going to show students my political allegiance? Some teachers do, some don't. Some kind of take the middle road, and some try to play devil's advocate. We're going to talk about this a little more with the delivery of civics in class later, but this one is, it can be tricky. Plus, again, depending where you went to high school, a lot of times you have to have some form of civic participation before you can graduate. You have to do volunteer hours. This is just another theme. So, civic ideals and practices. That would be a listing of the themes. And just to kind of show you something here, let me see if I can get my list back up. Okay, make that big. All right, if you go back to week 2, if you look here, I have some social studies and CSS information. You don't have to go back to this PowerPoint. I have all of them right there on a little handout for you. in a nice summarized fashion. That is actually not my handout that I created. That is actually from the National Council of Social Studies itself. But if you need that while you're doing the flip grid, that's fine. And again, when you're doing the flip grid and you see an image, I don't think I have him on there. So like say I have Napoleon on there. I might say that he's number 2, time, continuality and change. That's fine. That's my opinion. I might just say, well, he's a historical figure. He had a big influence on the history of the, early 19th century. I think he belongs in number 2. That's fine. Now, someone else might come in and say that he belongs in number 6 because he changed the government of France. He's a result of the French Revolution. That's fine. You can only pick one, though. So that is there. And also, I mentioned this. If you look at your syllabus, there's a book that it says you don't have to buy. This is the book. It's the National Standards for Social Studies Teachers. It has all of the information here on the themes and how it works. You can download this. You can type in and get the PDF offline. That's just again from their website. I just took it and put it on here in case you were interested. As you can see, it's not a short book, and that was one reason why I didn't want you to have to buy it. So those are the standards. They are there. I'm going to put the website up here also, though. I, for some reason, did not do that. And if you look, here's another thing that's very important for you. And I'm going to put them here just so you know. And this is going to be really important when you do your lesson plans. But the Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia state standards are here. I am a West Virginian at heart. I lived briefly in Maryland, but I was born here, raised here basically, went to school here. So I'm definitely the most familiar with West Virginia state standards. I'm going to open that one up and kind of focus on those standards in this class. If you're in Maryland, that's fantastic. I have family that lives right across the river. Maryland's a great state, but we're a West Virginia institution, so that's kind of where our bread is buttered, so to speak. So I kind of focus on the West Virginia standards. When you click on there, you can see you can type right in on your 6th grade standards, and they are all organized, and you can check them out right there. And in case you're wondering, 6th grade standards are usually, I always think they're World War I, clear up to the modern age. 7th grade standards are usually more world history. I always like teaching. I taught more middle school than I taught anything. And I always liked the 7th grade standards a lot, basically because they get into that, it's the first time the students are really getting any type of world history. So it's usually kind of interesting and they're more into it. 8th grade, if you're from West Virginia, you probably know this. That is West Virginia Studies. That is going to be your Golden Horseshoe. That is going to be your History Bowl, things like that. I will be sure to share those resources with you as we kind of get more into the class. Also, these are your college readiness standards. These are the skills in social studies that you need. They're overriding. Usually they go from, they'll say from like 6th through 8th, and then there'll be another set that are 9 through 12. This is your inquiry-based, the writing type stuff and all that outside the social stuff. They're not specific content things. They're more skill-based, which is very important. We'll talk about that with lesson planning. And this website does have resources, but in case you're wondering about your standards, there's the other ones. Of course, this doesn't get so much into AP standards and things like that, which a lot of you will probably end up teaching, your AP World or AP Euro, things like that. But in case you're wondering, 9th grade is usually traditionally world history. 10th and 11th gets into your US history, and then 12th is usually civics. But again, that can get a little thrown off depending on what students are taking for AP and such. But they're all right here. Those are your West Virginia state standards, and if you ever need them, they are here, or they will be in this wonderful place, resources. And I'm just going to show you this real quick. I know this thing has gotten huge over the years. I've taught this class even when I wasn't here full-time. I was an adjunct. I've just been building on it. You might, if you ever get a chance, kind of want to check here if you're looking for something. I've tried to really build it up. I will admit it's huge now, so you can email me and ask. But like if you're looking for praxis materials, I do have social studies praxis materials. We'll talk about that down the road. But there's a little bit on the test, the 5081 test. It's got the layout and what's on the test and such. But I digress. I'm kind of off the trails a little bit there. That, I think, is our first, full real week of teaching. This was, kind of what we would do in class, maybe a little more movement and spunkiness on my part, but I want to make sure we cover what we need to do. If you go on here, if you click on week 2, this video should be here already, but there's the outline and everything you need for the week should be here. Just to pull up the syllabus so we don't forget anything. Just kind of looking ahead. If you look, there is next week a philosophy statement on social studies that is due. Don't worry, it's not due until the 14th of September. I'm saying next week, like, it's tomorrow, but it's not. It's not due until the 14th, which is a Monday. I'm running kind of Mondays to Mondays. Mainly so if you all have questions about something over the weekend, you can just come in and talk to me if need be. But on the 14th, you have a philosophy of social studies statement. You've probably done philosophy of education statements before. That's fine. If you want to rework those a little bit, that's fine. But I specifically want you to address what your philosophy is in the realm of teaching social studies. Like, why do you want to teach social studies? What do you think is important in teaching social studies? What influenced you to teach social studies? You can think back to that, what the heck? There's a question on there, when I think of social studies, I think of maybe there's some people a lot of times will say a historical person. Some people will actually say a teacher. Maybe there's a teacher that influenced you. But long story short, not being too picky about the philosophy statement, I just want to make sure that you know that it is due on the 14th. But for next week, on the 7th, the 2 things that are due are the blog review on the resources, the living room candidate, and PowerPoint Palooza, and Flipgrid number 1. I'm going to stop talking because I'm sure I've repeated things a million times. Hopefully this helps. Again, I'm going to say it just to alleviate any worries on my part. But if you have any questions, please stop by my office, email me, or like I say, I'm just going to start setting up a Zoom room Mondays from like 11 to 12. If I need to keep it open longer, that's fine. If I'm going to be running a minute or 2 late on the Zoom room, I'll let you know, but it should be all good. So hopefully everything started smooth for everyone. Like I say, it was great seeing the intros. If you get a chance, stop by and say hi, because I haven't met some of you face to face, and normally we would. I actually may be some of your advisors now. I think I've actually been switched over from Dr. Cole. A lot of the social studies students are coming over, so I know we'll see you for advisement. So with all that being said, hope everyone is safe and getting through the semester and you're surviving, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.